There are sounds that belong to the night. The distant hum of traffic, the creak of old pipes, the occasional barking of a dog somewhere far away. And then there are sounds that don't belong anywhere. The knocking was one of them. I live in an old 5-story apartment building on the outskirts of a small city. The kind of Soviet-era concrete block that always looks abandoned, even when every apartment is occupied. The walls sweat in winter. The elevators break every month. And at night, the corridors become silent enough that you can hear someone turning over in bed 3 apartments away. Nothing interesting ever happened there. Until November. I remember the exact night because of the weather. The temperature had dropped suddenly after a week of rain. Thin sheets of ice covered the sidewalks. The trees outside my building looked skeletal beneath the yellow glow of the streetlights. Around 11:30, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking tea and scrolling through videos on my phone. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps. Not on my door, on my window. I froze. My apartment was on the 4th floor. Outside my kitchen window, there was nothing except empty air and the courtyard below. I stared at the glass. Nothing, just darkness. The reflection of my own kitchen. I waited. Maybe a bird. Maybe ice falling from the roof. Maybe some weird sound from the pipes. I convinced myself of all 3 explanations. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Exactly the same rhythm. Slow, deliberate, as if someone was politely asking to be let inside. My stomach tightened. I stood and approached the window. Outside, the courtyard lay silent beneath a blanket of frost. A lone street lamp illuminated the swings of the abandoned playground. No people, no movement, no birds, nothing. Yet the knocking had come directly from the glass. I checked the frame, the hinges. Everything looked normal. Eventually, I laughed at myself and locked the kitchen, finished my tea, and went to bed. The next morning, I had almost forgotten about it. Almost, until I met Mrs. Petrova. She lived on the 5th floor, apartment 51, an elderly woman who spent most of her days watching the courtyard from her balcony. If someone sneezed outside, she knew about it before anyone else. I was checking my mailbox when she approached me. "You heard it too." The question made me pause. Heard what? The knocking. A chill spread through my chest. What knocking? She stared at me. The windows. I didn't answer immediately. Her face became pale. "So you did hear it." I forced a smile. "Probably just the wind." There was no wind. She said it so quietly that I barely heard her. Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the stairwell. For some reason, the encounter bothered me more than the knocking itself. That evening, I returned home from work around 7. The building felt different. Not physically, emotionally, like people were avoiding eye contact. When I stepped into the elevator, I found 2 teenagers from the 3rd floor talking in hushed voices. The moment they saw me, they stopped. One of them looked nervous. The other looked terrified. I pretended not to notice. But before the elevator doors opened, I heard one of them whisper. It was at our window too. I turned. Neither boy met my eyes. The doors opened. They practically ran out. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The knocking, Mrs. Petrova, the teenagers. Coincidences, I told myself. People hear strange sounds. People influence each other. One rumor spreads through a building, and suddenly everyone thinks they're hearing ghosts. That's how these things happen. That's how they always happen. Around midnight, I was lying in bed reading. Then I heard it again.
Knock, knock, knock. Not from the kitchen. This time, from the bedroom window. The sound was so clear, it felt impossible. I sat upright instantly. The knocking came again. Knock, knock. My heart began pounding. The bedroom window overlooked the courtyard. I slowly approached. The curtains were closed. Something about opening them suddenly felt dangerous. Ridiculous, but dangerous. I stood there for several seconds. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound came from inches away, directly behind the curtain. Every instinct told me not to look, but curiosity won. I grabbed the fabric, pulled it aside. Nothing. The courtyard remained empty. The swings moved slightly in the wind. A cat crossed near the dumpsters. No person, no animal near the building. Nothing that could have reached a fourth-floor window. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt worse, because now I knew. I hadn't imagined it. The knocking had been real, and there was no explanation. The next morning, rumors had spread through the building. Everyone was talking about it. Some claimed they had heard knocking on second-floor windows. Others said the sounds came from higher up. One family swore they heard something walking on the outside wall. Another said they saw a silhouette climbing the building after midnight. Nobody had evidence. Nobody had recordings. Just stories. Yet the fear was becoming contagious. By the third night, people were staying awake, watching, waiting, expecting. And that's when the first sighting happened. The witness was a university student named Anton, 22 years old, lived on the 5th floor, apartment 48. At around 1 in the morning, he was gaming with headphones on when he heard the knocks. 3 taps against his window. He removed his headset, listened. 3 more taps. He approached the glass, looked outside, and saw something. The next day, he told everyone in the building. Most thought he was lying. Others thought he was drunk. But when he described what he'd seen, nobody laughed, because Anton couldn't stop shaking while he talked. According to him, something had been hanging outside the building. Not standing, hanging, like a spider. Its body pressed against the wall. Its limbs stretched impossibly far. The creature had been positioned above his window, clinging to the concrete, watching him. Anton said it was too dark to see details, but he remembered the eyes. Large, pale, reflective, like the eyes of an animal caught in headlights. The thing didn't move. It simply stared. Then it climbed upward, vanishing onto the roof. Nobody believed him, at least officially. Unofficially, everyone was terrified, especially because Anton moved out 2 days later. He left most of his furniture behind, never returned. Winter deepened, the nights grew longer, and the knocking continued. Every evening, every floor, always after midnight, always 3 knocks. People started keeping lights on. Some covered their windows with blankets. Others refused to look outside. Then something strange happened. The pattern changed. The creature, or whatever was causing the knocks, seemed to prefer occupied rooms. If a room was empty, nothing happened. If someone sat near the window, the knocking came. As though it knew, as though it watched, as though it waited. One night, around 2 in the morning, I decided to test it. A stupid decision. The kind of decision people make before becoming victims in horror stories. I placed a chair directly beside my bedroom window, turned off all the lights, and sat, watching, waiting. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. I began feeling embarrassed. Maybe the entire building had lost its mind. Maybe. Knock, knock, knock. The sound exploded from the glass beside my head. I nearly fell from the chair. Every muscle in my body locked. The knocking had come from less than a foot away. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. Then I slowly turned toward the window. Outside was darkness, nothing else. Just darkness, until something moved. A shape, high above, crossing the edge of the roof. A silhouette, too large to be human, too thin to be an animal, and moving with a strange, jerking motion, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. I stared. The shape vanished, gone. The courtyard became silent again. I rushed to the window, looked upward. Nothing. No figure. No explanation. Only darkness. And then I noticed something on the glass. 3 marks. Long, thin, scratched into the frost. Not fingerprints, not claw marks. Something in between. Exactly where the knocking had come from. I touched them. The ice around them was warm. Not melted. Warm. As if something alive had been pressing against the window moments earlier. That night I barely slept. The next morning, the scratches had disappeared, but something else had appeared. A notice taped inside the entrance, printed on ordinary paper. No signature, no explanation. If you hear the knocking, do not look outside. By evening, nobody admitted putting it there. And by midnight, every apartment in the building had received the first real proof that something was out there. Because for the first time, the knocking came from all the windows at once. Knock, knock, knock. And then dozens of terrified residents looked outside, only to discover that whatever had been visiting the building was no longer alone.
The sound woke everyone. Not because it was loud, because it was impossible. Imagine an entire apartment building being tapped from the outside at the exact same moment. 5 floors, dozens of windows, dozens of separate apartments. Yet every resident later described hearing the same thing. 3 knocks, perfectly synchronized. Knock, 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 knock. I shot upright in bed. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard screams. Real screams coming from somewhere above me. Another from the floor below. A dog began barking hysterically. Someone slammed a door in the corridor. And then, from outside, a sound that chilled me more than the knocking ever had. Laughter. Not normal laughter. Not human laughter. Something trying to imitate it. The sound echoed through the courtyard. High-pitched, broken, wrong, as if several voices were laughing through damaged throats. I ran to the window. The warning from the paper flashed through my mind. Do not look outside. For a moment, I almost obeyed. Almost, then curiosity won again. The same mistake people always make. I pulled the curtain aside. At first, I saw nothing. The courtyard was empty. Street lights glowed through drifting fog. The swings moved slightly. The trees stood motionless. Then I looked up. My blood turned to ice. Faces. There were faces outside the building. Not 1, not 2. At least 8. Maybe more. Pale shapes clinging to the walls. Some crouched beneath windows. Others hung upside down from balconies. The nearest one was only a few meters away, pressed flat against the concrete between the 4th and 5th floors, watching. Its eyes reflected yellow light. Its face looked almost human. Almost, but not quite. The proportions were wrong. The mouth stretched too wide. The cheeks seemed too thin. And the eyes looked enormous. Like those of a deep-sea creature dragged into sunlight. The thing didn't move. Neither did I. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then it smiled. I slammed the curtain shut. My heart nearly exploded. Somewhere upstairs, someone screamed again. A heavy crash followed, then running footsteps. I backed away from the window. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the room, to leave the apartment, to leave the entire building. Instead, I stood frozen, listening. The scratching began seconds later, slow, patient, directly against the glass. Scrape, 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 as though fingernails were sliding across the window. The sound continued for nearly 5 minutes, then stopped. Suddenly, completely. The silence afterward felt worse. By morning, the entire building was in chaos. Nobody went to work. Nobody sent children to school. Groups of residents gathered outside, discussing what they had seen. And almost everyone had seen something. Descriptions varied. Some claimed there were 6 creatures. Some others said 20. One woman insisted there had been dozens, but every account shared certain details. Pale skin, large eyes, long limbs, and smiles. Always smiles. The police arrived shortly after noon. 3 officers. They inspected the building, questioned residents, checked the roof.
Found nothing. No footprints. No damage. No evidence.
Officially, they suggested mass hysteria. Unofficially, one of the officers looked genuinely disturbed, especially after several residents showed photographs. Most were blurry, dark, almost useless, but one image stood out. A teenage girl from apartment 32 had managed to photograph something perched above her balcony. The image spread through the building instantly. The creature occupied only a small portion of the frame, yet everyone who saw it became quiet. Its body resembled a starving human. Its arms appeared impossibly long, and its eyes reflected white, even though no flash had been used. The police took the phone, promised to analyze the image. We never heard about it again. That night, nobody slept. Lights burned in nearly every apartment. Televisions stayed on. People called relatives. Some invited friends over because they were afraid of being alone. Around midnight, residents began watching the windows, waiting. The knocking arrived exactly at 12:47. Knock, knock, knock. This time nobody screamed. Everyone expected it. Then came something worse. The voice. A woman's voice, soft, gentle, coming from outside my bedroom window. Hello? I froze. The sound was so normal that for a second my fear vanished. It sounded like an ordinary young woman. Maybe 20 years old. Maybe younger. Can you help me? The voice trembled slightly, as though frightened, lost, cold. I stared at the curtain. Every instinct told me not to answer. Please. A pause. I think I'm hurt. The voice was directly outside the glass, on the 4th floor, 40 feet above the ground. I felt nausea rise into my throat. The thing outside knew exactly what it was doing. It sounded human. Perfectly human. Then I heard another voice. A man's voice. From a different window. Then another. And another. The creatures were speaking to residents all over the building, calling for help, imitating people, begging, crying. Some sounded like children. Others sounded elderly. One resident later claimed he heard the voice of his dead wife, word for word, exactly as she had sounded before cancer took her. That was when people truly began to panic. So, because knocking was one thing, voices were another. Voices meant intelligence. Voices, the next morning, several families moved out. By evening, more followed. The building lost nearly a third of its residents within 48 hours. Those who remained shared information constantly, comparing stories, looking for patterns, and eventually we discovered one. The creatures seemed interested in attention. The longer someone interacted with them, the more active they became.
If you ignored the knocking, it remained brief.
If you responded, it continued. One man learned this the hard way. His name was Victor. Apartment 43, 47 years old, divorced, former military, the type of person who laughed at ghost stories. According to Victor, the creatures were just pranksters, drug addicts, maybe climbers, nothing supernatural, nothing dangerous. On the seventh night, after several beers, he opened his window and shouted at them.
Residents heard the argument. Many recorded parts of it. Victor cursed, demanded they leave, threatened to call the police. The thing outside responded. Nobody knows exactly what it said. Accounts differ, but every witness agreed on one detail. The voice sounded exactly like Victor. Same tone, same accent, same words. For nearly a minute, the creature copied everything he said, sentence by sentence, perfectly. Then Victor stopped talking. It continued speaking in his voice, repeating phrases he had never said, describing events from his childhood, private memories, personal details, things nobody should have known. The recording ended there, because Victor slammed the window shut. The next morning, he looked exhausted, terrified. He refused to discuss the incident. 3 days later, he disappeared. No note, no explanation. His apartment remained locked. His car stayed in the parking lot. His wallet was found inside. He simply vanished. After Victor disappeared, nobody opened their windows again, not even slightly. The creatures adapted. Night after night, their behavior became stranger, more aggressive. They started appearing earlier, sometimes before sunset. Residents reported seeing pale figures crouched on rooftops nearby, watching the building, watching the people, always watching. And then came the footage. The footage changed everything. A security camera from a grocery store across the street captured part of the courtyard between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. One of the employees reviewed it after hearing rumors. What he found spread through the neighborhood within hours. The video showed the apartment building. Nothing unusual at first. Then, at approximately 2:17 a.m., movement appeared on the roof. A figure emerged. Then another. Then several more. They crawled down the walls. Not climbed, crawled. Like insects. Their limbs bent in ways that made no sense. They moved rapidly across vertical concrete, crossing floor after floor without effort, stopping at windows, knocking, moving on. The footage lasted 12 minutes. Then the camera malfunctioned. The screen filled with static. When the image returned, the creatures were gone. The employee who discovered the footage uploaded it online. By morning, the video had disappeared. No explanation given. But people had seen it.
Enough people. The rumors spread beyond our neighborhood.
News reporters arrived. Paranormal investigators arrived. Urban explorers arrived. Some stayed all night hoping to capture evidence. Most left before dawn, pale, silent, refusing interviews, as if they had seen something they couldn't explain. Then Mrs. Petrova died, or at least that's what everyone believed. She was found unconscious in her apartment after neighbors heard a loud crash.
Paramedics arrived quickly.
Police followed. Word spread through the building immediately. Residents gathered outside, whispering, waiting. Hours later, an ambulance departed, without lights, without sirens. The apartment was sealed. No official statement followed, yet something about the situation felt wrong, because several residents swore they saw movement inside her apartment later that night, a silhouette standing near the window, watching the courtyard. The problem was that Mrs. Petrova should have been in the hospital, or dead, depending on which rumor was true. Yet somebody remained inside apartment 51, and shortly after midnight, something knocked on her window. 3 slow taps. The following morning, apartment 51 was empty, completely empty. Furniture gone, photographs gone, clothes gone, as though nobody had ever lived there. Police denied entering. Maintenance workers denied entering. Nobody could explain how an entire apartment had been cleared overnight. That was when I realized something. Something terrible. The creatures weren't random. They weren't wandering. They were learning. Every night they became better at speaking, better at imitating, better at understanding people, as though they were studying us, preparing for something. And whatever that something was, it began 3 nights later, at exactly 3:03 a.m., when every resident in the building received the same phone call from the same unknown number. And when they answered, they heard their own voice speaking from the other end. The first thing I noticed was the ringtone. Not mine. Everyone's. At exactly 3:03 a.m., every phone in the building began ringing. Dozens of devices, different brands, different carriers, different numbers, yet somehow they all rang at the same moment. The sound echoed through apartments, corridors, and stairwells like a strange mechanical choir. I remember staring at my phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed in the darkness. Unknown caller. No number. No location. Nothing. Just those words. The ringing continued. Once, twice, 3 times. Eventually I answered. That decision would haunt me for years. For a moment there was only static. A faint crackling sound, like wind moving through dry leaves. Then I heard breathing. Slow, calm, very close. I opened my mouth. Hello? The breathing stopped, and then I heard my own voice answer. Hello. Every hair on my body stood up. The voice was perfect. Very similar. Not close. Perfect. My exact voice. My exact tone. Even the slight rasp I had developed after years of smoking. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then the voice laughed softly. My laugh, my voice, my throat, coming from somewhere outside. I hung up immediately. The phone rang again, instantly. I rejected the call. It rang again, and again, and again. No matter how many times I declined it, the call returned. Finally, I turned the phone off. The ringing stopped. Only then did I realize people were shouting in the building. Doors opened, footsteps thundered through the corridors. Someone was crying. Someone else was screaming. A man yelled for everybody to stay inside. Another shouted that the creatures had entered the building. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone was terrified. I moved carefully toward the window. The curtains remained closed.
I didn't dare open them. Not after the previous nights.
Yet I could hear something outside.
Whispers. Hundreds of whispers.
Soft voices drifting through the darkness. Some sounded male, some female, some young, some old. Every one of them sounded human, and every one of them was speaking the same sentence, over and over. We know who you are. The whispers continued until sunrise. Then they stopped, instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch.
That morning, the building looked exhausted.
People moved through the courtyard like sleepwalkers. Dark circles under their eyes. Pale faces. Shaking hands. Shaking hands. Nobody smiled anymore. Nobody joked. Even the children had become quiet. Fear had settled into the building like a disease, and the disease was spreading. By noon, the phone calls had become the main topic of conversation. Everyone had received one. Every single resident.
And nearly every call
Had followed the same pattern. The voice began by imitating the recipient. Then it gradually started saying things that nobody else should know. Private memories, secrets,
fears, embarrassments,
traumas. One woman burst into tears while describing hers. The caller had repeated details about her childhood abuse, events she had never shared with anyone, not even family. A teenager reported hearing descriptions of dreams he had never told another person. An elderly man claimed the voice knew the contents of letters he had burned 40 years earlier. The creatures weren't merely observing people. They somehow knew them deeply, intimately.
impossible knowledge.
Knowledge they should never have possessed. That realization changed everything. Because now residents stopped asking what the creatures were. Instead, they began asking something far worse. How long had they been watching? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. 3 days later, apartment 27, a woman named Elena, 32 years old, lived alone, worked as a pharmacist, quiet, friendly, completely ordinary.
At approximately 1 in the morning,
Neighbors heard knocking at her window. Nothing unusual there. Everyone heard knocking now. But this time, Elena responded. Several residents later admitted hearing her speaking through the wall, having a conversation. A long conversation, nearly 20 minutes. Then silence. The next morning she was gone, vanished. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no blood, no note, nothing, nothing. Her apartment remained untouched.
her purse sat on the kitchen table.
Her phone rested beside it. Her keys hung near the door. It looked as though she had simply ceased to exist. Police investigated. Again. Police found nothing. Again. And that was when the disappearances started. One every few days. Then one every night. Residents vanished from locked apartments, from bedrooms, from living rooms, from bathrooms. No evidence, no explanation, just absence. The building slowly emptied.
People fled whenever possible. Some stayed with relatives.
Others rented hotel rooms. A few abandoned most of their belongings. Anything was preferable to spending another night there. Within 3 weeks, more than half the apartments stood empty. Yet the knocking continued, as if the creatures didn't care, as if numbers were irrelevant, as if they only needed a few people. The remaining residents formed groups. Nobody wanted to be alone. We shared information.
The compared experiences.
Created rules. No looking outside after midnight. No answering unknown calls. No speaking to voices outside windows. No opening curtains during knocking. No exceptions. At first, the rules seemed effective. The disappearances slowed. Fear remained, but at least people survived. Then the creatures changed tactics again. Then evening, I returned from work and found something waiting outside my apartment door. A photograph. Old. Faded.
Vok at the edges.
The image showed me. At age 10, standing beside my father at a fishing lake. A photograph I hadn't seen in over 20 years. A photograph stored inside a family album hundreds of kilometers away. My hands trembled. I turned the picture over. 3 words were written on the back. We remember too. I nearly vomited because there was only one explanation. Something had entered my home, not my apartment, my childhood home. Somehow, somewhere,
At some point.
the creatures possessed access to places they should never have seen, and they wanted me to know it. The same thing happened throughout the building. Photographs appeared, personal items appeared, objects connected to forgotten memories. One resident found a toy she had lost in kindergarten. Another discovered a letter written by a deceased grandfather. Another found a necklace stolen decades earlier. Impossible things.
Things that should not have existed anymore. The creatures weren't just gathering information.
They were collecting people, collecting histories, collecting lives, almost like archivists or predators, maybe both. Then came the rooftop incident, the event that convinced even the skeptics. A local journalist decided to spend the night on the roof. He wanted proof, real proof, not rumors, not blurry videos, proof. He arrived with cameras, flashlights, recording equipment, everything.
The footage was recovered the next morning.
Most of it showed nothing. Hours of darkness, wind, snow, silence. Then, around 2:41 a.m., movement appeared. The journalist pointed his flashlight toward the opposite side of the roof. Something stood there, tall, motionless, watching him. The recording quality was poor, yet one detail remained visible. The creature looked exactly like the journalist. Same height, same build, same face, at least from a distance.
The man noticed it too.
The camera captured his confusion, then fear, then panic. The figure began walking toward him, slowly, deliberately. The journalist shouted, demanded identification. No response. The figure continued approaching. Closer, 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 closer. The final image froze everyone who watched it, because as the creature entered the flashlight beam, its appearance changed. The face remained human, but the proportions became wrong.
Exact details, the smile widened impossibly.
The eyes enlarged, the limbs stretched, the disguise peeled away, revealing something underneath, something ancient, something hungry. The recording ended abruptly. The journalist disappeared. His body was never found. After that, nobody questioned the danger anymore. Whatever lived around the building was real, and it was escalating, night by night, step by step, learning, adapting, improving,
as though approaching some final stage.
Then winter reached its coldest point. The city experienced a severe snowstorm. Roads closed.
Power lines failed.
Visibility dropped to almost nothing. For 2 days, the neighborhood became isolated, trapped. And on the second night of the storm, the electricity went out. The entire building plunged into darkness. At first, people assumed it was weather-related, a temporary outage, nothing unusual. Then emergency lights failed too. The backup generators never activated. The darkness felt unnatural, complete, heavy, oppressive. Outside, the storm howled.
Snow battered the windows.
Residents gathered in corridors, carrying candles and flashlights. Nobody wanted to remain alone. Nobody wanted to remain near windows. We sat together in silence, listening, waiting. Around 1 a.m., the knocking began. Not at windows, at apartment doors. Knock, 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 a pause, then another door. Knock, 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 then another, and another, and another. Something was moving through the hallways.
Inside the building.
The knocks gradually climbed floor by floor, approaching us, closer, 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 until they reached the 4th floor, my floor. Nobody breathed, nobody spoke. The corridor became completely silent. Then we heard footsteps, slow footsteps, walking toward us through the darkness. A flashlight beam swept down the hall, empty, no one visible. Yet the footsteps continued, approaching, step, 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 step.
A child began crying.
His mother covered his mouth. The footsteps stopped, directly outside our gathering. Then came a voice, soft, familiar, terrifying. My name is Elena, the missing pharmacist, apartment 27, the woman who had vanished weeks earlier. The voice sounded exactly like her. Please let me in. Nobody moved. Nobody answered. The voice continued. I'm cold. A pause. Then they found me. Silence.
Then dozens of voices
Spoke together from the darkness, all whispering the same sentence, all perfectly synchronized. And every voice belonged to someone who had disappeared. We're outside. At that moment, we realized the most horrifying possibility of all. The missing residents had not escaped. They had not died. And whatever was knocking on the windows was becoming them.
Nobody slept after the blackout.
Nobody even tried. We remained gathered in the 4th floor corridor until dawn, surrounded by candles and weak flashlight beams. The storm continued raging outside. Wind screamed through ventilation shafts. Snow struck the walls like handfuls of gravel. And every few minutes, someone glanced toward the darkness at the end of the hallway, expecting to see a face staring back. Nothing appeared. The voices never returned.
But their absence didn't bring comfort.
It made things worse. Because now we knew the creatures could enter the building, or at least make us believe they had. When sunrise finally arrived, people hurried back into their apartments. The storm had weakened. Electricity returned. The world looked normal again. Almost. But normality had become meaningless. Nothing felt safe anymore. Not windows, not doors, not telephones, not even neighbors, especially not neighbors. That realization began with apartment 38. A man named Sergei lived there. 40 years old, electrician, one of the few residents who had remained calm through the entire ordeal. He wasn't fearless, just practical. The kind of person who needed evidence before believing anything. The morning after the blackout, Sergei vanished. His disappearance differed from the others. This time, there were signs. The apartment door stood open. The lights remained on. Coffee still steamed in a mug on the kitchen table. His television played quietly in the living room. And on the wall above the sofa, someone had written a message. Not with paint, not with marker, with scratches, deep grooves carved directly into concrete. 3 words. He opened it. Nobody knew what it meant. Police photographed the wall, collected samples, asked questions, found nothing. Again, yet one detail disturbed everyone. Sergei's neighbors reported hearing him talking around 4 in the morning. Not arguing, talking, as if speaking with a guest who had entered willingly. The idea spread quickly. The creatures didn't need to force their way inside. They only needed permission. That night, nobody opened their doors, not for anyone. No exceptions, even if relatives knocked, even if police knocked, even if someone claimed to need help, especially if someone claimed to need help. The rules were changing, growing harsher, more desperate. And somehow they still weren't enough. Because 3 nights later, I saw one of them up close, closer than any human should. It happened around 2:30 a.m. I was sitting in my kitchen, all lights off, listening to the building breathe. Old pipes rattled softly inside the walls. The refrigerator hummed. Everything felt still. Then I noticed movement in the courtyard. A figure standing beneath a street lamp. At first, I thought it was a person. Then it looked up. The face caught the light, and I nearly screamed. It was me. My face, my body, my clothes, every detail identical. The figure stood motionless, watching my window, watching me, smiling. The smile stretched wider, far wider than human muscles should allow. Then the thing raised one hand and waved, slowly, casually, like an old friend. I stumbled backward from the window. My pulse hammered in my ears. For nearly 10 minutes, I remained frozen against the wall, unable to think, unable to move. Eventually, I forced myself to look again. The courtyard was empty. The figure had vanished. But something remained. Footprints. A trail of footprints crossing fresh snow, leading directly to the building and stopping beneath my window. There were no tracks leading away, only tracks arriving, none leaving, as though the thing had climbed the wall. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone, at least not immediately, because part of me feared what the answer might be. If the creatures could imitate appearances, how could anyone know who was human? How questions soon became impossible to ignore. Apartment 44. A married couple, Mikhail and Anna. They had survived everything so far. Ignored the voices, ignored the knocking, followed every rule. Then Anna disappeared. One night she went to bed. The next morning she was gone. No signs of struggle, no clues, nothing. Mikhail broke down completely. For 2 days he searched,
Called police.
visited hospitals, contacted relatives. No result. Then, on the 3rd night, Anna came home. At least that was what she claimed. Residents heard knocking, heard the apartment door open, heard voices, and by morning, Anna appeared to be back. The problem was that something felt wrong. Neighbors noticed immediately. She spoke differently, moved differently, blinking less often, smiling too much, sometimes staring at people for uncomfortable lengths of time. Most disturbing of all, she seemed confused by ordinary things. One neighbor greeted her by name. She hesitated before answering, as though recalling which identity she was supposed to wear. Mikhail insisted she was fine, just traumatized. Everyone wanted to believe him for about a week. Then a child asked Anna a question, a simple question.
What happened to you?
Witnesses later described what followed. Anna smiled, then tilted her head. Farther, 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 until her neck bent at an impossible angle, almost 90 degrees. And she answered, "I'm still learning." The child screamed. Adults rushed forward, but Anna simply walked away, calmly, normally, as though nothing unusual had happened. After that incident, she vanished again, along with Mikhail. Their apartment remained empty.
Nobody entered it afterward.
Nobody wanted to. By February, fewer than 30 residents remained in the building. Nearly 70% had fled. Many apartments sat dark and abandoned. Their empty windows resembled missing teeth. The building felt less like a home and more like a dying organism. Every corridor seemed longer, every shadow darker, every silence heavier, and the creatures were becoming bolder. People reported seeing them during daylight, only briefly.
Reflections in shop windows.
Figures standing at bus stops. Faces watching from parked cars. Always disappearing when approached. Always just far enough away. They weren't confined to the building anymore, or perhaps they never had been. One afternoon, I encountered something that convinced me of that. I was returning from a grocery store. The streets were crowded. Normal city life. Cars, pedestrians, children, nothing unusual.
Then I noticed a woman standing across the road,
Watching me.
She looked familiar. Very familiar.
It took several seconds before I realized why. She was Elena, the pharmacist, the first confirmed disappearance, the woman who had vanished months earlier. She stood perfectly still among moving crowds, smiling, watching. When our eyes met, she raised one finger, pointed upward, toward the sky. Then she turned and disappeared into the crowd. I ran after her, pushed through pedestrians, crossed the street, searched everywhere.
Nothing. Gone.
Like smoke. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the gesture, pointing upward. At first, it seemed meaningless. Then I understood. The roof. The creatures always came from the roof. Whatever they were doing, whatever they wanted, the answer might be there. The idea terrified me, but curiosity had already ruined my life. So 3 nights later, Armed with a flashlight and every bad decision I'd ever made, I climbed the stairs, 5th floor,
Then higher.
toward the roof access door. The building felt strangely quiet. No knocking, no voices, no movement, just silence. I reached the top landing. The metal roof door stood slightly open. I knew immediately that something was wrong. Residents always kept it locked. Always. Yet now it hung ajar. A thin line of darkness beyond. Cold air drifting downward. I should have turned back. Instead, I pushed the door open. The roof lay covered in snow. Moonlight illuminated everything in pale silver. At first glance, it appeared empty. Then I saw them. Dozens of shapes, standing along the edges, motionless, watching the city. Some looked human, others didn't. Some appeared half-finished, like copies still being formed, and all of them faced away from me, toward the horizon, toward something beyond the city, beyond the darkness. I crouched behind a ventilation unit, trying not to breathe, trying not to move. Then one of the figures spoke. Its voice carried across the roof. Soft, almost reverent. "They're coming," another voice answered. "How many remain?" The first voice replied, "Enough." A terrible silence followed. Then every figure turned simultaneously toward me. Dozens of pale faces, dozens of enormous eyes, dozens of impossible smiles. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. My body simply acted. I sprinted toward the door. Footsteps exploded behind me. Hundreds of footsteps. Too many. Far too many. Something shrieked. Something laughed. Something called my name.
I reached the stairwell and slammed the door shut. The impact echoed through the building. For several seconds, I expected claws to tear through metal, expected faces to appear through the glass. Nothing happened. Silence. Only silence. Eventually, I stumbled back to my apartment, locked every lock, blocked every door, and spent the rest of the night shaking, because one sentence refused to leave my mind. They're coming. Not we. They. Something else existed. Something worse. The creatures weren't the final threat. They were waiting for something, preparing for something, serving something. And according to them, it was almost here. The proof arrived the next evening, when residents across the building reported seeing a new figure outside the windows. Not climbing, not crawling, not smiling, just standing on the roof, watching. A figure far larger than the others, tall enough to be visible from every floor. And unlike the creatures, this one had no face at all, only a smooth white surface where a face should have been. The knocking stopped that night, for the first time in months. No taps, no voices, no phone calls, nothing. The silence felt wrong, like the pause before a thunderstorm, like the moment before an execution. And deep down, every remaining resident understood the same thing. The creatures were no longer hunting. They were waiting. Waiting for the faceless thing on the roof. Waiting for whatever came next. Waiting for the final night.
The silence lasted 4 days. 4 days without knocking. 4 days without whispers. 4 days without phone calls. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing inside the eye of a hurricane. Everyone sensed it, even the skeptics. Even the people who still insisted there had to be a rational explanation. The building had become unnaturally quiet. The creatures had vanished. No faces appeared outside windows. No pale shapes crawled across walls.
No footsteps echoed through the corridors. Nothing. Only silence. And the figure on the roof. Every night residents saw it, standing perfectly still against the dark sky, watching, waiting, the Faceless One. That was the name people gave it, not because it lacked a face, because it seemed to lack everything human. No expression, no movement, no emotion, just a towering white silhouette visible from every angle of the courtyard. Some estimated it stood 3 meters tall. Others claimed 4. The size seemed to change depending on who described it, like distance meant nothing to it, like perspective itself bent around its presence. Nobody approached the roof anymore. Nobody even looked upward for long. Those who did often complained of headaches, nosebleeds, strange dreams, and the dreams were becoming common, very common. Almost every remaining resident reported them. The same dream. The same impossible landscape. The same impossible sky. A black ocean stretching endlessly beneath stars that didn't belong to Earth. Thousands of pale figures standing knee-deep in dark water, motionless, waiting. And far beyond them, something enormous rising from the horizon. Something so vast that the dreamers could never see all of it. Only fragments. A limb, an eye, a shape, pieces of something impossible. Whenever people tried describing it, they failed. Words broke apart. Memories blurred. Yet everyone woke terrified. Because despite the differences, one detail remained constant. The creatures from the building stood in the water, waiting for it to arrive. By March, fewer than 20 residents remained. Most apartments sat abandoned. Entire floors felt deserted. The building itself seemed hollow, like an empty shell. One evening, I walked through the 5th floor. The corridor lights flickered overhead. Dust covered many doors. Mail piled up in forgotten boxes. Everything felt dead. Then I heard movement. A door opening somewhere ahead. Slowly, cautiously, I froze. The sound came from apartment 51, Mrs. Petrova's apartment, the apartment that should have been empty, the apartment that had somehow been cleared overnight months earlier. The door stood open now, only slightly. A thin gap, darkness beyond. I should have walked away. Instead, I approached. Every survival instinct I possessed had become useless long ago. The closer I got, the colder the corridor felt. My breath became visible. The air smelled strange, like wet earth, like soil freshly dug from a grave. I reached the doorway, looked inside, and immediately wished I hadn't. The apartment wasn't empty, not anymore. Every wall was covered with photographs, thousands of photographs, floor to ceiling, old photographs, new photographs, color, black and white, Polaroids, digital prints, every available surface buried beneath images. People, families, children, residents, former residents, the missing, the dead, everyone. Photographs from birthdays, vacations, schools, hospitals, private moments, intimate moments, moments no stranger should ever have witnessed. I stepped inside. My flashlight trembled. The photographs continued into every room. Kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, everywhere.
Then I noticed something horrifying. The images were organized.
Categorized, documented, like research, like observation records, like something studying human beings. And in the center of the living room stood a table, covered with photographs of me, hundreds of them. Images from childhood, teenage years, adulthood, photos I didn't even know existed, pictures taken through windows, across streets, inside cafes, at work, at home. Years of my life arranged neatly before me. I wasn't being watched for months. I had been watched for years. Maybe decades. A sudden sound echoed behind me. Names, observations, thousands of entries. Most made little sense. People were listed alongside strange symbols, measurements, comments. Then I found a repeated phrase, again and again, across dozens of pages. Preparation phase. Below it appeared names, residents, former residents, the missing. Each name eventually received a second notation, complete. My stomach twisted. The creatures weren't hunting randomly. They were processing people, preparing them. For what? I still didn't know. Then I reached the final pages. The handwriting changed, becoming larger, more erratic, almost excited. One sentence filled an entire page. The door opened soon. The next page contained a date. 3 days away. 3 days. That was all. No explanation, no location, nothing else. Just certainty. The door opened soon. 3 days later, I didn't sleep that night. Neither did anyone else after I shared what I'd found. The remaining residents gathered in the lobby. 15 people. 15 exhausted survivors. Nobody knew what to do. Leave? Stay? Call authorities? Authorities had already failed, repeatedly. And deep down, we all knew something terrible. If escape were possible, the missing residents would have escaped. Whatever was happening had already spread beyond the building. The first sign appeared the next evening. The sky changed. At sunset, a dark shape emerged above the city. Not clouds, not weather, something else. A stain, a distortion, a black wound stretching across the horizon. People stopped in the streets, pointed upward. Traffic slowed. News stations reported unusual atmospheric conditions. Meteorologists offered explanations. None fit. The darkness continued growing, hour by hour. Night arrived early. The city became restless. And on the final evening, every remaining resident received another phone call. Unknown caller. Nobody answered. It didn't matter. The phones answered themselves. One by one, screens illuminated, speakers activated, and every device began broadcasting the same voice. Not human, not animal, something vast, something ancient. The language made no sense, yet somehow everyone understood. A single message, repeated endlessly. It is time. Outside, alarms erupted across the city. Car alarms, building alarms, emergency sirens. Dogs barked frantically. People shouted. The world felt wrong, as if reality itself were straining under pressure. Then came the first scream, a real scream, from outside. We rushed to the lobby windows and saw the courtyard. Hundreds of figures stood there, not residents, not people, copies, imitations, duplicates. Every missing resident, every vanished person, standing silently beneath the apartment building. Looking upward, waiting. The creatures had finished their work, and behind them stood the faceless one, closer than ever before, towering over the crowd. Motionless, its smooth white head tilted toward the sky. The darkness above the city began rotating, slowly, like an enormous whirlpool opening in the heavens. A hole, a doorway. People throughout the courtyard fell to their knees. The duplicates remained standing, watching, waiting. The faceless one raised one arm, for the first time since appearing. The gesture seemed simple, yet the entire city reacted. Windows shattered. Streetlights exploded. Car alarms died instantly. Even the air felt different, heavier, older. And from inside the black opening above, something looked back. Not a face, not a creature. A presence. A mind. A vast intelligence pressing against reality, from the other side. I cannot fully describe what I felt in that moment. Fear isn't the correct word. Terror isn't either. Imagine realizing humanity occupies only a tiny corner of existence. Imagine discovering something infinitely larger has finally noticed us. That feeling, that helplessness, that certainty. The faceless one lowered its arm. The opening widened. And then, everything stopped. Every movement, every breath, the world froze for one impossible second. And during that second, every duplicate in the courtyard turned toward the building, toward us, toward the survivors. Their mouths opened simultaneously, and they spoke in perfect unison, the final words I ever heard in that place. Thank you for opening the door. Then darkness consumed everything.
When I opened my eyes, the city was gone. At first, I thought I had gone blind. There was no light, no sound, no sensation of movement, only darkness, absolute darkness, the kind that feels physical, the kind that presses against your skin. For several seconds, or perhaps hours, I floated in it, unable to determine whether I was standing, sitting, or lying down. Then I heard water, a distant ripple, soft, gentle, almost comforting. The darkness slowly receded. Shapes emerged. A horizon. A sky. A black ocean stretching infinitely in every direction. Exactly like the dreams. My blood froze. The dreams had been real. Or rather, they had been memories. I stood ankle deep in dark water. The surface reflected stars, but the stars were wrong. They formed impossible constellations, patterns that hurt to observe. Some seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Others appeared to blink, not twinkle, blink, as if they were alive. As if the sky itself was watching. I turned slowly. The ocean extended forever. No shore, no land, no buildings, nothing except figures, thousands of them, standing silently in the water, rows upon rows disappearing into darkness, human silhouettes, motionless, facing the same direction, waiting. The missing residents. I recognized many immediately. Elena, Sergei, Mrs. Petrova, Mikhail, Anna, Anton, dozens more. Hundreds more. Not just from our building. From everywhere. Men, women, children, elderly, thousands. Maybe millions. All standing silently beneath the impossible sky, and none of them moved. I approached Elena first, carefully, fearfully. The water rippled around my legs. She remained motionless, eyes open, breathing, alive, yet somehow absent. Elena? No response. I touched her shoulder, cold. Not dead cold, ocean cold, ancient cold. Slowly, mechanically, her head turned toward me. The movement resembled a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Her eyes focused. Recognition appeared. For a moment, only a moment. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't be awake." My throat tightened. What is this place? Elena stared beyond me, toward the horizon, toward something hidden in darkness. The waiting room. The answer made no sense. What are we waiting for? Her expression changed, a flicker of fear, the first real emotion I'd seen. Then she whispered one word. Birth. A scream echoed somewhere far away. Not human, not animal. Something vast. The sound rolled across the black ocean like thunder. Every figure in the water turned simultaneously toward the horizon. And for the first time, I saw it. Something stood there, far away, yet impossibly large. At first, my mind refused to understand. The shape resembled a mountain, then a city, then a continent. The thing existed beyond scale, beyond proportion. Only fragments remained visible above the dark horizon. A curved surface, something like an eye, something like bone, something like architecture. The more I looked, the less certain I became. My brain struggled to interpret it, failed, and every second I stared, nausea worsened. The enormous shape shifted. The entire ocean trembled. The stars flickered, and a single thought entered my mind. Not a voice, not words, a thought. It knows you're awake. I collapsed into the water. Pain exploded behind my eyes. Blood streamed from my nose. The pressure became unbearable, like standing before a nuclear explosion of consciousness. Then the presence withdrew, instantly. The pain vanished. The ocean became calm again. But now I understood something. The creatures from the building weren't servants. They weren't hunters. They weren't even the real threat.
They were caretakers, shepherds, gatherers, collecting people for this place, preparing them, and whatever waited beyond the horizon was still incomplete, still growing, still being born. A hand touched my arm. I flinched. Mrs. Petrova stood beside me. The old woman looked exactly as I remembered, except her eyes. They reflected distant stars. "They noticed you," she said quietly. "You have to hide." "Hide from what?" She looked toward the horizon. "You already know." Another scream echoed across the water. Closer now. Much closer. The surface began vibrating beneath my feet. Thousands of silent figures slowly turned, watching the darkness ahead. Something was approaching. Something enormous. The ocean parted. Physically. Water separated into two vast walls extending toward the horizon. And along that path came movement. The pale creatures. Hundreds. Thousands. The same long-limbed things that had climbed the apartment building. Only now, I saw them clearly. They weren't monsters. Not originally. Beneath distorted features lingered traces of humanity. Fragments. Remnants. Like copies generated from damaged memories. Some still resembled people. Others barely retained human shape. All moved toward the enormous presence beyond the horizon. Drawn to it. Serving it. Returning home. One of them noticed me. Its head snapped in my direction. Then another. Then dozens. The creatures froze, watching, the same way predators watch wounded animals. Mrs. Petrova's expression darkened. "You stayed awake too long." The nearest creature opened its mouth. The scream that emerged shattered the silence. Immediately, hundreds responded. Then thousands. The entire ocean erupted with shrieking. The creatures began running. Toward me. Toward us. Moving across water at impossible speed. I ran. Instinct took over. Water splashed around my legs. The dark pathway stretched endlessly ahead. Behind me, thousands of footsteps approached. The sound resembled rainfall, like an entire storm chasing me. The sky darkened further. Stars disappeared one by one, extinguished, consumed. And above everything else rose a new sound. Heartbeat. Massive. Slow. Boom. The ocean trembled. Boom. The stars flickered. Boom. The horizon moved. Not metaphorically. Actually moved. The impossible shape was rising, awakening, being born. The thing beyond the horizon had begun to emerge. I risked a glance backward. Big mistake. The sight nearly stopped my heart. The ocean no longer existed behind me. Only an eye. A single colossal eye opening across the horizon. Larger than mountains. Larger than cities. Focused directly on me. Awake. Fully awake. A thought struck my mind with enough force to make me stumble. Who remembers you? The question wasn't spoken. It existed inside me. Ancient. Immense. Hungry. Who remembers you? Again. Stronger. Reality seemed to warp around the words. My memories flickered. Faces vanished. Names disappeared. Fragments of my life evaporated. The thing wasn't asking a question, searching for every person who knew me. Every memory connected to me. Every trace of my existence. And then I understood what the creatures had been collecting. Not bodies, not souls, memories, human lives, human histories, human identities. They were feeding them to something. Something that consumed remembrance itself. Every missing resident had been erased. They were caretakers, shepherds, gatherers, collecting people for this place, preparing them, and whatever waited beyond the horizon was still incomplete, still growing, still being born. A hand touched my arm. I flinched. Mrs. Petrova stood beside me. The old woman looked exactly as I remembered. Except her eyes. They reflected distant stars. They noticed you, she said quietly. You have to hide. Hide from what? She looked toward the horizon. You already know. Another scream echoed across the water. Closer now. Much closer. The surface began vibrating beneath my feet. Thousands of silent figures slowly turned, watching the darkness ahead. Something was approaching. Something enormous. The ocean parted. Physically. Water separated into two vast walls extending toward the horizon. And along that path came movement. The pale creatures. Hundreds. Thousands. The same long-limbed things that had climbed the apartment building. Only now, I saw them clearly. They weren't monsters. Not originally. Beneath distorted features lingered traces of humanity. Fragments. Remnants. Like copies generated from damaged memories. Some still resembled people. Others barely retained human shape. All moved toward the enormous presence beyond the horizon. Drawn to it. Serving it. Returning home. One of them noticed me. Its head snapped in my direction. Then another. Then dozens. The creatures froze, watching, the same way predators watch wounded animals. Mrs. Petrova's expression darkened. You stayed awake too long. The nearest creature opened its mouth. The scream that emerged shattered the silence. Immediately, hundreds responded. Then thousands. The entire ocean erupted with shrieking. The creatures began running. Toward me. Toward us. Moving across water at impossible speed. I ran. Instinct took over. Water splashed around my legs. The dark pathway stretched endlessly ahead. Behind me, thousands of footsteps approached. The sound resembled rainfall, like an entire storm chasing me. The sky darkened further. Stars disappeared one by one, extinguished, consumed. And above everything else rose a new sound. Heartbeat. Massive. Slow. Boom. The ocean trembled. Boom. The stars flickered. Boom. The horizon moved. Not metaphorically. Actually moved. The impossible shape was rising, awakening, being born. The thing beyond the horizon had begun to emerge. I risked a glance backward. Big mistake. The sight nearly stopped my heart. The ocean no longer existed behind me. Only an eye. A single colossal eye opening across the horizon. Larger than mountains. Larger than cities. Focused directly on me. Awake. Fully awake. A thought struck my mind with enough force to make me stumble. Who remembers you? The question wasn't spoken. It existed inside me. Ancient. Immense. Hungry. Who remembers you? Again. Stronger. Reality seemed to warp around the words. My memories flickered. Faces vanished. Names disappeared. Fragments of my life evaporated. The thing wasn't asking a question, searching for every person who knew me, every memory connected to me, every trace of my existence. And then I understood what the creatures had been collecting. Not bodies, not souls, memories, human lives, human histories, human identities. They were feeding them to something that consumed remembrance itself. Every missing resident had been erased. For a long time, I simply stared at the scratches. We remember you. The words were carved into the inside of the glass. Not the outside, the inside. I ran my fingers across the grooves. They were real, deep, fresh. No matter how many times I blinked, they remained. That single fact destroyed any hope that the previous months had been a hallucination. Something had happened, something impossible. And somehow, I was the only person who remembered it. The first sign came later that afternoon. I was sitting in a cafe 3 blocks from the apartment building, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. The city appeared normal. People laughed, traffic flowed, children played, life continued. No signs of panic, no signs of mass disappearances, no signs that a hole had opened in the sky. Nothing. Then the woman at the neighboring table dropped her cup. The ceramic shattered. Coffee spilled across the floor. She didn't react. She was staring at me. Not casually, not curiously, staring. Frozen, terrified. I looked away. When I glanced back, she was still staring. Then she whispered, "You were there." My blood turned cold. I stood immediately. The woman looked equally frightened, as though she regretted speaking. "You remember?" I asked. Her face paled. For several seconds she said nothing. Then, "I don't know. I keep having dreams. The same dreams. The black ocean, the impossible stars, the waiting figures." She described everything, every detail, exactly. I listened in silence. When she finished, tears filled her eyes. I thought I was crazy. Before I could respond, her expression changed. Confusion replaced fear. The recognition vanished from her face. Like a light being switched off. What were we talking about? I froze. She genuinely didn't know. The memory had disappeared, erased in real time, within seconds. Whatever had happened wasn't over. The forgetting was still happening, still spreading, still working. And something inside me knew exactly where I needed to go. The archives. If memories could vanish, perhaps records survived. Physical evidence, documents, newspapers, photographs, something, anything. The city archives occupied an old government building near the river. 3 floors of records stretching back decades. The place smelled of dust and paper. Perfect. Memories preserved in physical form, or so I hoped. A clerk guided me toward newspapers from the previous winter. I spent hours searching, days even. Every headline, every local report, every emergency bulletin. Nothing. No disappearances, no unexplained events, no mass evacuation, no strange atmospheric phenomena. It was as if the entire nightmare had never happened. Then I found one anomaly. A single newspaper issue from January. One page had been removed. Not torn, carefully cut out, professionally. The missing page corresponded exactly to the week Elena vanished. My pulse quickened. I requested the archive copy. Missing. The microfilm version. Corrupted. Digital backups. Unavailable. Every trace of that page had disappeared. Deliberately. Not forgotten. Removed. Not transformed. Erased. The world gradually forgot them. Photographs vanished. Records disappeared. Memories faded. They became fuel, food. And now the thing had noticed me. The realization filled me with horror, because if it consumed every memory of a person, what remained? The answer arrived immediately. I saw it in the water. Reflections. Thousands of reflections, human shapes without faces, without names, without histories. The empty copies wandering beneath the impossible sky. The things that eventually returned to Earth wearing stolen identities. The creatures. That was what they truly were. Not monsters. Leftovers. The remains of consumed lives. The screaming behind me intensified. The creatures were gaining ground. Closer, closer, closer. Then, through the chaos, I heard a familiar voice. My father's voice. Impossible. He had died 12 years earlier. Yet somehow I heard him clearly. Wake up. The words echoed through darkness. The ocean flickered. The creatures hesitated. The giant eye blinked. Everything around me became unstable, like a dream collapsing. Again, the voice. Wake up. Light appeared. A tiny crack in reality. Then another. Then hundreds. The black ocean fractured. The sky shattered. The impossible stars broke apart. The creatures screamed in panic. The giant eye widened. And for the first time, the ancient presence seemed afraid. Something had gone wrong. Something had interrupted the process. The world around me began collapsing. Faster, faster, faster. And as darkness consumed everything once more, I heard the final thought from the thing beyond the horizon. A thought filled not with anger, but anticipation. We will knock again. Then the universe shattered, and I woke up, back in my apartment, on the floor. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. The city stood outside. Cars moved. People walked. Everything looked normal. For a moment, I believed it had all been a dream. Then, I noticed the building. Most apartments were occupied again. Different residents, different families, different lives. The months of disappearances seemed absent from everyone's memory. Police records had vanished. News reports had vanished. Photographs had vanished. No one remembered. No one except me. And on the inside of my bedroom window, scratched into the glass from the outside, were 3 words. 3 fresh scratches. 3 impossible scratches. We remember you. If the creatures remembered me, then perhaps I could find where they remembered me from. The notebook, Mrs. Petrova's apartment, the photographs, the records. I had only skimmed them before. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there was a clue, something pointing toward the source, something explaining why I survived, why I remembered, why they cared. The apartment remained unlocked, exactly as before. Dust covered the floor. Photographs still lined the walls. Yet, something had changed. Many images had faded, faces blurred, entire people disappearing from pictures. The forgetting process was accelerating. Reality itself seemed to be correcting evidence, erasing traces, cleaning the wound. Then I discovered a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard. Inside lay several notebooks wrapped in plastic. Older than the first, much older, decades older. Some entries dated back to the 1960s, others to the 1940s. One notebook contained records from 1928. My hands trembled as I read. The same building, the same phenomenon, different generations, different residents. The knocking always returned. Every few decades, sometimes after 10 years, sometimes 20, sometimes 50, but always returning, always collecting, always preparing. One entry stopped me cold, dated November 14th, 1947. A resident described seeing creatures outside the 5th floor windows. The building hadn't existed in 1947. It wasn't constructed until the 1970s. Yet the description matched perfectly. The writer even drew sketches. Long limbs, pale skin, large eyes, smiling faces, identical. The knocking wasn't tied to the building. The building had been built around the knocking, around a place, a location, a wound. The realization struck me immediately. Whatever existed beneath our apartment block had existed long before the city, long before the roads, long before the people. Something ancient slept beneath that ground, and every few decades, it woke up hungry. I turned another page, then another, until I reached the final notebook, the newest one. The final entry had been written only days before the sky opened. The handwriting belonged to Mrs. Petrova. The last sentence covered the entire page. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because I desperately wanted to be wrong. But the words never changed. They remained exactly the same. The next door will open elsewhere. Beneath the sentence sat a list. Cities, dozens of them. Countries, coordinates, dates, future locations, future openings, future feedings, future knockings. The cycle wasn't ending. It was moving. And the first city on the list was scheduled to begin in less than 3 weeks, somewhere thousands of kilometers away. Somewhere filled with people who had absolutely no idea what was coming. Somewhere a creature had probably already begun climbing walls at night. Somewhere a resident had probably already heard 3 slow knocks against a window that should have been impossible to reach. And somewhere, right now, someone was opening the curtain. For nearly an hour, I sat alone on the floor of Mrs. Petrova's apartment, staring at the list. The handwriting never changed. The ink never changed. The dates never changed, no matter how many times I checked. The first location remained exactly where it was, a city I had never visited. A city large enough to disappear into, large enough for people to ignore strange noises, large enough for fear to spread unnoticed, large enough for something ancient to feed. That was all. 3 weeks before the cycle began again. At first, I considered calling someone. Police, government agencies, journalists, anyone. Then I remembered what had happened to every piece of evidence connected to my city. Records vanished. Photographs faded. Memories dissolved. If I presented the notebooks, they would likely disappear too. Or worse, perhaps someone would take them. Perhaps someone already knew. Because during the previous months, one question had remained unanswered. Who removed the evidence? The creatures didn't seem interested in secrecy. The faceless ones certainly didn't. Something else had been protecting the cycle. Cleaning up afterward. Maintaining the illusion. And that meant I couldn't trust anyone. Not completely, not anymore. So I left the city alone. 2 days later, one suitcase, the notebooks, a camera, and the growing certainty that I was making a terrible mistake. The train journey lasted 14 hours, long enough to doubt everything, long enough to convince myself I had become paranoid, long enough to almost turn back. But every time uncertainty appeared, I remembered the black ocean, the impossible stars, the giant eye, and the scratches on my window. We remember you. That memory always won. The city greeted me with rain, cold rain, gray skies, crowded streets, perfect anonymity, perfect camouflage. No one paid attention to strangers here. No one noticed unusual behavior. No one looked twice at anything. Exactly the sort of place where horror could thrive. I rented a small apartment overlooking an old residential district. Rows of aging 5-story buildings stretched across the neighborhood. When I first saw them, a chill ran through me. Not because they resembled my building, because one of them resembled it exactly. Same shape, same balconies, same windows, same worn concrete exterior. Even from a distance, I knew. The cycle had chosen its new nest. The first week passed quietly. Nothing happened. No strange sightings, no reports, no disappearances. Part of me started feeling foolish. Then, on the 8th night, I heard sirens. Several police vehicles arrived near the building. Residents gathered outside, whispering. I moved closer, careful not to attract attention. A woman stood nearby, speaking to officers. She looked frightened, exhausted, pale. Eventually, I overheard enough fragments to understand. Someone had reported knocking. 4th floor window, around midnight. 3 taps. My heart sank. The cycle had begun. The next morning I returned. The building appeared ordinary. Children walked to school. Elderly residents fed pigeons. Nothing unusual. Nothing supernatural. Just life. Exactly the way my building had looked in the beginning. I wanted to warn them. I really did. But how? What could I say? Hello. In a few months, creatures will climb your walls and harvest your memories for an ancient cosmic entity beyond reality. Good luck. No. Nobody would listen. I knew, because I wouldn't have listened either. Not back then. Not before the first knock.
So instead, I watched and documented and waited. The second incident occurred 3 nights later. Apartment 52, top floor. A university student named Marek. The similarities immediately disturbed me. A young man, late-night gaming, knocking on a window, just like Anton. Almost exactly like Anton. I learned this through local social media groups. Residents were already discussing rumors, already sharing stories, already dismissing them. The pattern was repeating itself perfectly. Like a script, like a machine following instructions. 1 week later, the first photograph appeared online. Blurry, dark, almost useless. Yet I recognized the creature immediately. The long limbs, the pale face, the reflective eyes. The comments beneath the image followed predictable paths. Fake, Photoshop, urban legend, hoax, attention seeker. Exactly the same reactions, exactly the same disbelief. Fear needs time to mature. The creatures understood that. They never rushed. The second week brought voices. The third brought phone calls. By the fourth week, people had started moving out. I watched everything happen again. The same steps, the same escalation, the same terror. Sometimes I felt like a man watching a train head toward a broken bridge, knowing exactly what would happen, unable to stop it. One evening, I finally met someone who remembered. A teenage girl named Lena. 17. Apartment 34. Her message appeared online beneath a discussion thread. A simple sentence. Does anyone else dream about the Black Ocean? The moment I saw it, I contacted her. We met the following day. A cafe. Public place, safe place. At least theoretically. Lena looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Shaking hands. The familiar signs. The signs I had once carried myself. She described the dreams perfectly. Every detail. The waiting figures. The impossible stars. The horizon. The presence. Everything. Then she asked a question that nearly stopped my heart. Have you seen it too? Not them. It. Singular. The giant thing beyond the horizon. I nodded. The relief on her face was immediate. Like a drowning person finding another survivor. For the first time since leaving my city, I wasn't alone. At least I thought so. Then she showed me a photograph. The image depicted a page torn from an old notebook. A notebook identical to Mrs. Petrova's. The handwriting matched. The symbols matched. Everything matched, except the dates. These entries were recent, very recent. Someone in the new city was already documenting the cycle, which meant one of two things. Either another witness had survived previous events, or someone was helping the creatures. Neither possibility was comforting. Together, Lena and I began searching. The notebook page included an address, an abandoned building near the river. The location felt familiar immediately, not visually, emotionally. The same feeling I experienced when approaching the roof, the same feeling I experienced in the Black Ocean, the same feeling I experienced near the photographs. Wrongness, pure wrongness. We arrived shortly before sunset. The building had once been a school. Now it stood empty. Windows boarded. Paint peeling. Silent. The front doors hung open, as though inviting visitors inside. A terrible sign. Everything associated with the cycle seemed eager to be found. We entered cautiously. Dust covered the floors. Classrooms stood abandoned. Broken desks lay scattered throughout dark corridors. Then we found the basement. The air changed immediately. Colder, heavier. The sensation felt familiar, too familiar. At the bottom of the stairs stood a metal door, locked, ancient, rust-covered, and scratched deeply across its surface were 3 words. We were first.
Lena stared. So this happened before. I nodded slowly. Much earlier. The scratches covered more than the door. Walls too. Thousands of marks. Layers upon layers. As though generations had attempted to leave warnings, messages, evidence, proof. Then we noticed the sounds. Knocking. Faint. Very faint. Coming from somewhere beyond the metal door. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Lena stepped backward. I did too. Because the knocking didn't sound distant. It sounded close. Extremely close. As though something stood directly behind the door. Waiting. Listening. The metal vibrated. Once. Twice. Then a voice emerged. Muffled. Distorted. Yet unmistakably human. Help. The word echoed through the basement. Then another voice, and another, and another. Hundreds, thousands, speaking simultaneously. Not screaming, not crying, simply asking. Help, help, help. My stomach twisted. Because I recognized several voices. Elena. Mrs. Petrova. Anton. Residents from my building. The missing, all speaking from beyond the door. Then came a different voice, one I had never heard before. Calm, patient, ancient. A voice that seemed older than language itself, and when it spoke, every other voice fell silent. The words emerged slowly, clearly, as though the speaker knew I would understand. You came back. The basement lights exploded. Darkness swallowed everything. And somewhere beyond the metal door, something enormous began to move. The darkness lasted only a few seconds. But in those few seconds, something changed. The air became colder. Not winter cold, not underground cold. The kind of cold that feels alive. The kind that seems to crawl beneath your skin and settle around your bones. When my flashlight flickered back on, Lena was standing exactly where she'd been, yet her face had changed. Not physically, emotionally. She looked terrified, far more terrified than before, because she had heard the voice too. And unlike the creatures, unlike the knocking, unlike the impossible dreams, the voice had felt real, ancient, patient, conscious, most horrifying of all, interested. The metal door stood motionless at the end of the corridor, rust-covered, silent. Nothing moved behind it now. Nothing knocked. Nothing spoke. The basement had become still again. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something on the other side was listening, waiting for us to make the next move. Lena whispered first. We need to leave. I agreed immediately. For the first time since this nightmare began, every instinct I possessed pointed in the same direction. Run. Now. We turned and hurried toward the stairs.
Neither of us spoke until we reached street level. Only then did the pressure ease slightly. Only then did breathing become easier. We walked several blocks before stopping. Rain continued falling. Cars passed.
People moved through sidewalks. Normal life. Normal reality. Yet both of us knew something terrible.
The door existed. Not metaphorically.
Not symbolically. A real door. A physical location. And something beneath the city was speaking through it. That night, neither of us slept. Around 3 a.m, Lena called me. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. She was crying. Not hysterically, quietly. The way people cry when they're genuinely afraid. It's outside. My blood froze. I didn't need clarification. What floor? 5th, of course. Always the 5th floor. The creatures loved height, loved windows, loved watching people from impossible places. I grabbed my coat immediately. By the time I reached her apartment building, police cars already surrounded the entrance. Residents crowded outside, whispering, pointing upward. The crowd parted as an ambulance arrived. Not a good sign. Not at all. I found Lena near the sidewalk. Pale, shaking, unable to stop staring at the building. What happened? Her answer came slowly. There was a boy. My stomach tightened. What boy? The one from the courtyard. I remembered instantly. The child version of myself. The thing I'd seen months earlier. Lena continued. He was outside my window, 5th floor, 40 feet above the ground. Impossible. Exactly as expected. He knocked. 3 taps. Always 3. I ignored him. Good. Very good. Then her expression darkened. He knew my name. Silence. Rain fell around us. Traffic hummed in the distance. Neither sound felt real anymore. He said things. What things? She looked at me. Fear filled her eyes. The future. The words hung between us. Cold. Heavy. Impossible. I said nothing. Lena swallowed, then continued. He described things that haven't happened yet. I wanted to dismiss the idea, wanted to explain it rationally. But after everything we'd seen, I couldn't. What kind of things? A fire, a pause, tomorrow, another pause, apartment 23. The ambulance doors closed behind us. A stretcher disappeared inside. Lena lowered her voice. The boy said one person would die. The next evening, apartment 23 caught fire. A faulty electrical connection. According to investigators, one resident died from smoke inhalation. Exactly as predicted, the news spread rapidly through the building, then through the neighborhood, then through online communities discussing the strange events. People became frightened, not because of the creatures, not because of the knocking, because of certainty. The creature had known. The future wasn't hidden from it. That realization changed everything. Because now, the question wasn't what the creatures wanted, the question was when they wanted it. And the answer arrived 3 days later. Another notebook surfaced. This one mailed anonymously to Lena. No return address. No sender.
just a package left outside her apartment door. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, older than any we'd previously found. The earliest entries dated back to 1843, long before apartment buildings, long before modern cities, long before anyone should have known about the knocking. The writer never identified himself. Yet his descriptions were unmistakable. The creatures, the dreams, the forgetting, the doors, everything. For nearly 2 nights we read through the journal. Most entries contained observations, theories, warnings. Then we found the final section, and everything changed. According to the writer, the creatures weren't invaders. They were survivors, fragments, remnants, the leftovers of previous worlds, civilizations that had already been consumed. Worlds where the door had opened. Worlds where the thing beyond the horizon had awakened completely. Worlds erased so thoroughly that no memory remained. Not even myths. Not even fossils. Nothing. Only the creatures endured. Broken pieces carrying stolen identities, trying desperately to remain real, trying desperately to avoid being forgotten. The realization horrified me, because for the first time I understood why they collected memories. Not for the entity, for themselves. They were feeding on remembrance, using human minds to remain alive. The knocking wasn't hunting, it was begging. The creatures needed people to look, to acknowledge them, to remember them. Otherwise, they faded, disappeared, ceased to exist. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. The smiles, the imitation, the voices, the desperate attempts at conversation. The creatures feared the same thing we did: erasure. But the entity beyond the door, that thing was different. It didn't fear being forgotten. It caused forgetting. It consumed it. A predator feeding on existence itself. Near dawn, Lena found a passage highlighted repeatedly throughout the journal. One sentence, written dozens of times, almost obsessively. The door opens from both sides. Neither of us liked that sentence, not even a little, because until now we'd assumed the entity was trying to enter, trying to come through, trying to reach us. But what if that wasn't true? What if something else wanted access? Something here. Something on our side. That possibility became much harder to ignore the following evening, because someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was stolen, nothing damaged, yet the message left behind was unmistakable. Written across my living room wall in black paint: "Stop looking." 3 words, large enough to cover half the room. Stop looking. Someone knew what we were doing. Someone wanted us to stop. The police dismissed it as vandalism. Of course they did. But I noticed something strange. The officer taking my statement seemed distracted, confused.
As though struggling to remember why he'd come. At one point, he stared directly at the message, then asked, "What message?" I felt my stomach drop. The paint still covered the wall. The letters remained visible, yet somehow his mind ignored them. The forgetting wasn't passive. It was active, selective, protective. Reality itself resisted certain knowledge. Later that night, Lena called again. This time, she sounded worse than ever. He found me. My pulse accelerated instantly. Who? The man from the journal. Silence. The writer? No. A pause. The last person who owned it. 20 minutes later, we met in a public park. Lena handed me a photograph. The image showed an elderly man, thin, gray-haired, standing outside the abandoned school. The same school with the basement door. The photograph had been taken that evening, and scribbled across the back was a short message. He remembers. Below the words appeared an address. Nothing else. No explanation, no sender, just an address. We debated for hours. Every rational part of my brain wanted to ignore it. Burn it. Forget it. Leave the city. Run. But curiosity remained my greatest weakness. It had brought me here. It had kept me alive. Or doomed me. At this point, I wasn't sure which. So the following night, just before midnight, Lena and I drove to the address. The road led beyond the city, past suburbs, past industrial districts, past everything. Eventually, we reached a forest. Deep, ancient, silent. The address ended at a small wooden house hidden among trees. One light burned inside. Yellow, weak, waiting. Neither of us spoke. The forest felt wrong. Not supernatural. Older than that. Like a place that had witnessed something terrible long ago and never recovered. We approached slowly. The front door stood open. Another bad sign. Inside sat an old man, alone at a wooden table, reading. He looked up as we entered and smiled. Not a creature smile, a human smile. Tired, sad, resigned. Then he spoke the words that would change everything. I've been waiting for survivors. The room suddenly felt much colder, because for the first time, we had found someone else who remembered. Someone who had seen the door open and lived. Someone who knew what happened after the knocking ended. Someone who knew the truth. And judging by the look in his eyes, the truth was far worse than we imagined.
The old man introduced himself as Victor. At least, that was the name he still used. Later, I would learn that names meant very little to people like him. People who had survived the door. People who remembered too much. The small house smelled of wood smoke and old books. Every wall was covered with shelves. Every shelf overflowed with journals, photographs, maps, and handwritten notes. The room looked less like a home and more like an archive. A museum dedicated to impossible things. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The fire crackled, and Victor simply watched us, studying, evaluating, as if determining whether we were still human. Finally, Lena broke the silence. "How much do you know?" Victor laughed. Not happily, not bitterly, just tired. Enough to wish I didn't. That answer immediately convinced me he was telling the truth. Anyone claiming certainty would have been lying. The closer you got to the truth behind the door, the less certainty existed. I had learned that already. Victor poured tea into 3 cups. His hands trembled slightly. Age, perhaps, or memory. Then he spoke. I first heard the knocking in 1978. My chest tightened. That date mattered. The year my apartment building had been completed. Victor noticed my reaction. Yes, he said quietly. The same cycle. The room suddenly felt smaller, more enclosed. The old man continued. I was 19, young, curious, stupid, exactly the sort of person the knocking seemed to prefer. His story sounded disturbingly familiar. A 5th-floor apartment, 3 knocks, dreams, disappearances, voices, everything. The same pattern repeating once again. But there was one difference.
One detail we'd never encountered. Victor had opened the curtain. The words hung in the air. Lena and I exchanged glances. Neither of us spoke, because opening the curtain was the one rule everyone understood. Never look, never answer, never acknowledge. Yet Victor had, and somehow survived. The old man stared into the fire for a long time. Then he whispered. I saw what was outside. A silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable, the sort of silence people create when they're deciding whether to continue. Eventually, he did. What did you see? I asked. Victor's expression changed. Fear. Not remembered fear. Fresh fear, as though the memory remained alive. As a child, I believed monsters hid under beds. A pause. As an adult, I learned monsters hide behind faces. Another pause. What I saw wasn't pretending to be human. The fire crackled softly. Rain continued outside, and Victor finally looked at us, directly. There was no creature. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? The window was empty.
That made no sense. Victor nodded.
I know. He took a slow breath, then continued. I looked outside. Nothing. No figure. No face. No pale thing climbing walls. Just darkness. The courtyard. Snow. Silence. For several seconds, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed the reflection. The room became very quiet, because I already knew, even before he explained. The reflection, not outside the glass, inside it. Victor swallowed. My reflection moved. Lena's hands tightened around her cup. The old man continued speaking, slowly, carefully, as if every word mattered. I stood still. The reflection smiled, a smile wider than his own. Then the reflection raised one hand and tapped the glass from inside. 3 knocks. Knock, 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 knock. Nobody spoke. The story felt wrong. Wrong in a deeper way than monsters or cosmic entities. Because reflections aren't supposed to have intentions. Reflections aren't supposed to act independently. Victor stared into the fire. The thing outside the window wasn't trying to enter. Another pause. It was trying to switch places. A chill spread through my body. I remembered every copy, every duplicate, every imitation. The child version of me, the adult version of me, the smiling faces. Suddenly, they seemed far more dangerous, because perhaps they weren't copies at all. Perhaps they were replacements. Victor continued. The door doesn't create creatures. His voice had become quieter, almost a whisper. It creates possibilities. Neither Lena nor I understood. Victor noticed immediately. Think of reality as a road. He traced a line across the wooden table. Every choice creates another road, another line, and another, and another. Soon dozens of branching paths covered the table. Most possibilities never happen. He looked up. They remain unreal. The room felt colder, much colder. The door changes that. Silence. Then it allows other possibilities to look back. For several seconds, nobody spoke. My mind struggled to process the idea.
Alternative lives, alternative versions, alternative histories, the copies, the creatures, the reflections, not imitations, versions, versions of people who existed somewhere else, somehow, somewhere beyond the door. Victor nodded when he saw understanding appear. They want reality. The statement felt horrifyingly logical. They need someone to remember them. Another pause. Otherwise, they disappear. I remembered the black ocean, the faceless figures, the remnants, the leftovers. Everything fit. Everything. Except one thing. The entity. The giant presence beyond the horizon. The eye. The ancient intelligence. What is it? Lena asked. Victor's face darkened. For the first time since meeting him, genuine terror appeared. Not fear. Terror. The difference mattered. The old man stood. Walked toward a bookshelf. Removed an ancient journal. Leather-bound. Almost black with age. He placed it carefully on the table. The cover contained a symbol. A circle surrounded by hundreds of smaller circles. Eyes. At least they resembled eyes. Victor opened the journal. Most pages contained illustrations. Ancient illustrations, far older than modern civilization. Cave drawings, temple carvings, stone etchings, different cultures, different continents. Yet all depicted the same thing. A vast eye watching humanity, always watching, always waiting. My pulse accelerated. How old is this? Victor smiled sadly. Older than history. The answer sounded impossible. Yet after everything else, impossible had lost much of its meaning. The old man pointed toward one illustration. A circle, a doorway, people entering, people leaving. Then a large symbol above them, an eye. The door has existed forever. He spoke quietly. Different names, different cultures, different myths. Same phenomenon, same hunger, same watcher. Lena looked pale. I probably looked worse, because a realization had begun forming, slowly, terribly. If the cycle repeated every few decades and had existed forever, then humanity wasn't discovering it. Humanity was surviving it, generation after generation, civilization after civilization. Each cycle consuming people, memories, entire histories, then erasing evidence.
Like waves erasing footprints, the world had forgotten countless times. Victor seemed to read my thoughts. It doesn't want humanity. The statement surprised me. What? The old man shook his head. Humanity is incidental. A pause. Food. The words settled heavily in the room. Food. Nothing more, nothing less. Not chosen, not special. Simply available. Like fish in an ocean, or insects in a field. The scale of the idea horrified me. Not hatred. Indifference. Pure indifference. The way a storm ignores individual lives. The way gravity ignores suffering. The entity beyond the door wasn't malicious. It was hungry. And hunger didn't require cruelty, only consumption. Then, Victor said something that changed everything. Something that made every previous revelation seem insignificant. There is a reason you're still alive. My heartbeat accelerated immediately. The old man looked directly at me. You shouldn't have survived. The room became silent, very silent, because I had wondered the same thing for months. Why me? Why remember? Why wake up? Why return? Victor leaned forward, the firelight reflected in his eyes. You've already crossed the threshold. A pause. You just don't remember it. The words struck like a physical blow. What are you talking about? The old man hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty appeared. Then he answered, when the door opened above your city. Another pause. You didn't come back alone. The room froze. Lena looked at me. I looked at Victor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The old man's expression remained grim, careful, almost apologetic. Then he whispered the sentence that would haunt me for the rest of my life. And somewhere deep in the forest, beyond the darkness, 3 slow knocks echoed through the trees. Knock, knock, knock. Victor closed his eyes, as though he had been expecting them, as though he knew exactly what those knocks meant. And as the lights flickered once more, he whispered, they found us. For several seconds after Victor spoke, nobody moved. The fire crackled softly. The wind rattled the windows. Outside, the forest remained hidden behind darkness, and somewhere among the trees, something had knocked. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. The sound seemed impossible, not because it existed, because it felt familiar. The same rhythm, the same patience, the same certainty. The thing outside knew exactly where we were. His age vanished. His exhaustion vanished. For the first time since meeting him, he looked like a man who had survived, because he learned how to react quickly. They shouldn't have found us this soon. Lena looked pale. What found us? Victor laughed bitterly. You. The word hung in the room. Then he looked directly at me. Or what's wearing your memories? I don't understand. You will. The old man walked toward a cabinet and removed a metal box. Inside lay dozens of photographs. Most showed ordinary people, families, children, couples. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed something horrifying. The same faces appeared repeatedly, decades apart. The same people, the same expressions, the same smiles, unchanged, impossible. Victor placed several photographs in front of me. Each depicted a different survivor. People who had remembered. People who had escaped. People who had crossed the threshold. Then he showed me the final photograph. The image was grainy, old, black and white. A man stood beside a railway station. The photograph was dated 1953. The man's face was mine. Exactly mine. Not similar, not related. Mine. I stared, unable to speak, unable to breathe. The first time I saw him was 40 years ago. The room seemed to tilt slightly. That's impossible. It should be. The old man looked genuinely sad. Yet here we are. Lena grabbed another photograph. A woman in a crowded marketplace. Then another, then another. The same face. My face. Always present. Always watching. Always surviving. Something cold settled inside my chest. A possibility. A terrible possibility. What are you saying? Victor took a long breath, then answered. The thing beyond the door cannot enter completely. A pause. It needs anchors. Another pause. People who remember. The realization arrived slowly. Painfully. Like a knife sliding deeper. The survivors weren't escaping. They were being marked, connected, used. Every person who remembered became a doorway, a crack, a weak point. When you woke up, after your city was consumed, he looked directly into my eyes. Something woke up with you. Outside, the knocking came again. Closer. This time from the wall itself. Knock, knock, knock. The wooden boards trembled. The fire dimmed. The temperature dropped. And suddenly, memories flooded my mind. Not my memories. Other memories. Thousands. Millions. Lives I had never lived. Cities I had never visited. Deaths I had never died. Entire civilizations collapsing beneath black skies. People staring upward as impossible stars appeared overhead. Children hearing knocks against windows that should never have been reached. World after world, cycle after cycle. Endless, ancient, repeating. The force of it drove me to my knees.
I heard Lena shouting. Heard Victor swearing. Heard glass shatter somewhere inside the house. Then I saw it.
not with my eyes, with memory. The black ocean, the giant eye, the waiting figures, and among them stood a man, my face, my body, my voice, watching me from the shoreline, smiling. Not a monster's smile, my smile. The version of me that had waved from the courtyard. The version that had stood beneath my window. The version that had survived every cycle. He spoke, not aloud, inside my head. Now you remember. The truth hit me all at once. I had never escaped the black ocean. Not completely. A part of me remained there. A reflection, a possibility, an alternate self born from another path. And during the collapse of the door, our memories had become tangled together, merged. That was why I remembered. That was why I survived. That was why the creatures knew my name. I wasn't merely a witness. I was connected. The thing wearing my face wasn't hunting me. It was trying to become whole again. The walls of the cabin suddenly exploded inward. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. Cold wind flooded the room. And through the darkness between the trees, dozens of pale figures emerged. The creatures, hundreds of them, watching, waiting. Behind them stood a single silhouette, my silhouette, perfectly still, perfectly calm, wearing my face. The reflection smiled, then took one step forward. Every creature immediately fell silent. The forest itself seemed to stop breathing. Then the reflection spoke, using my voice. We're out of time.
The creatures surrounded the cabin. Hundreds of pale faces staring through broken windows, watching, waiting. Yet none approached. None attacked. None moved. They were waiting for a decision. My decision. The reflection stood alone among them, hands in his pockets, calm, patient, almost human, almost. Victor understood before I did. His face went pale. No. The old man looked terrified. Not of the creatures, not of the entity beyond the door. Of the choice. The reflection smiled gently. You already know. I did, somehow. The memories flooding my mind had shown me enough. The door never truly closed. Every cycle merely delayed it. Every survivor became a lock. Every memory became a chain. And I was one of the locks. One of the final locks. The reflection stepped closer. The creatures parted around him, still silent, still watching. If you stay here, he said softly, another city dies. The words felt true, horribly true. I could feel the connection now, like invisible threads stretching across reality, across countries, across oceans, across countless sleeping minds. The next cycle had already begun. The knocking had already started. Children were already dreaming. People were already hearing voices. The process was spreading through me, through the part of me that had returned from the black ocean. The reflection raised a hand, not threatening, not hostile, almost compassionate. Come back. The forest darkened, the sky seemed to bend, and suddenly I saw the door. Not beneath the city, not in another dimension. Everywhere, a crack running through existence itself. Ancient, endless, waiting. Beyond it, the giant eye opened, watching, hungry, patient. Not evil, simply inevitable. The way winter is inevitable. The way death is inevitable. The way darkness eventually arrives after sunset. And for the first time, I understood something important. The entity didn't feed on humanity. It fed on possibility, on memory, on alternate realities. Human lives merely happened to contain both. We were food because we remembered. Nothing more, nothing less. Victor grabbed my arm. There must be another way. The reflection looked genuinely sad. There never was. Silence followed. The wind stopped. The creatures remained motionless. The giant eye waited beyond reality. And I finally understood why the knocking always came 3 times. Not because it wanted permission, not because it wanted entry, because every cycle offered 3 choices. Ignore, remember, return. Most people ignored, some remembered, only a few returned. And those few kept the door closed for everyone else. The realization brought an unexpected calm. For months, I had searched for answers. Now I finally had them. The price simply happened to be everything. I looked at Lena. She was crying. I looked at Victor. The old man already knew. He had known from the beginning. That was why he lived alone, why he collected survivors, why he waited, not to stop the cycle, to delay it. One more generation, one more chance. I smiled weakly, then stepped toward the reflection. The creatures watched, the forest watched. Reality itself seemed to watch. The reflection extended his hand. I took it. The moment our fingers touched, every memory exploded outward. Childhood, dreams, lives, worlds, civilizations, infinite reflections of infinite possibilities.
Becoming one. The giant eye blinked. The door began closing, slowly, painfully, like a wound healing. The creatures screamed, not in fear, in grief. One by one they faded, their stolen faces dissolving into darkness. The forest brightened, the sky cleared, the impossible pressure vanished, and for the first time in countless cycles, the knocking stopped, everywhere. The last thing I saw was Lena, standing beside Victor, alive, safe, remembering. Then the world disappeared. No one ever saw me again. Officially, I vanished somewhere in the forest. A missing person case. Nothing more. The notebooks disappeared. The photographs disappeared. The evidence faded, just as it always had. Years passed, then decades. The city continued living. Children grew up. Families moved in and out. People forgot stories that never made sense anyway. Life moved forward. And somewhere on a quiet evening many years later, an old woman named Lena sat beside a window overlooking a peaceful street. She had almost forgotten, almost. Then she noticed something, a small scratch in the glass. 3 words, old, faded, barely visible, yet still there. She touched the letters gently and smiled, because unlike everyone else, she remembered. The words read, "The door is closed." And for the first time in human history, nothing knocked back.